we celebrate our religious mothers and foremothers, past, present, and future. We honor them for all they accomplished and passed down to us. We celebrate our sense of community and its generations of people of all genders, expanding freedom and justice, always making the circle of our faith wider and wider. We open this service with respect and support for the greater circle of all life of which we are a part. Now, our chalice lighting is going to involve honoring the 4 directions. So for those who are physically able to do so, I will be asking you to stand and face the directions. If you're not able to stand, maybe you could turn your head in the direction. If that would be a problem and would hurt your neck, just sort of cast your thoughts in the direction of the direction. So we're going to start off with the east. Now, luckily, you are all facing east right now. Isn't that great? So face east. Look at number 446 in your hymnals, and let's all say together, starting with Spirit of the East, Spirit of air, of morning and springtime, be with us as the sun rises, in times of beginning, times of planting. Inspire us with the fresh breath of courage as we go forth into new adventures. Okay, we're going to face south, that way. Spirit of the south, spirit of fire, of noontime and summer, be with us through the heat of the day, and help us to be ever growing. Warm us with strength and energy for the work that awaits us. For those of you who are able, face the west, that way. Spirit of the west, spirit of water, of evening and autumn, be with us as the sun sets, and help us to enjoy a rich harvest. Flow through us with a cooling, healing quietness, and bring us peace. Those who are able, face the north. Spirit of the north, spirit of earth, of nighttime and winter, be with us in the darkness, in the time of gestation.
Ground us in the wisdom of the changing seasons as we celebrate the sorrowing journey of our lives.
Our opening hymn is one of the hymns that got changed in the historical process that we are going to be talking about in this morning's sermon. I don't know if you'll be able to catch where the words were changed in Morning Has Broken. It's number 38 in your hymnals.
Like the first morning, blackbird has flown.
us join our voices in our historic affirmation that we share with so many Unitarian Universalist churches. You'll find it in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine, thus to be covenant with each other and with God. Now you may be seated. And now is the part of our service that we reserve for the sharing together of those special personal joys and sorrows that occur in each one of our lives. Anyone who wishes to is welcome to come forward and light a candle in silence, if you should choose, or briefly, I want to emphasize briefly, share with us what lies on your heart this morning. And this candle is for all of the silent cares and worries, sadness, joys, triumphs, and defeats that all of us carry, but that we don't always feel comfortable sharing. Let us remember that everybody is carrying an invisible knapsack of the burdens in their life, and we should strive to treat everyone who comes within our orbit with gentleness, care, and compassion. We have a reading for our meditative response. It is number 517 in the back of your hymnal, written by Starhawk, who is not a Unitarian Universalist, but she is Unitarian Universalist friendly. Your part of the reading is in italics. I, who am the beauty of the green earth and the white moon among the stars and the mysteries of the waters,
I call upon your soul to arise and come unto me.
For I am the soul of nature that gives life to the universe.
From me all things proceed, and unto me they must return.
Let my worship be in the heart that rejoices, for behold, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals.
Let there be beauty and strength, power and compassion, honor and humility, mirth and reverence within you.
And those who seek to know me know that your seeking and yearning will avail you not unless you know the mystery.
For if that which you seek you find not in yourself, you will never find it without.
For behold, I have been with you from the beginning.
And I am that which is attained at the end of time.
Beautiful, beautiful words to take to heart. Please remain seated for our meditation hymn, number 123 in your hymnals, Spirit of Life, in a slower tempo.
Sing in my heart, for the
I want to point out that Spirit of Life is another part of our history that comes from the era we're talking about in this service. Carolyn McDade is also not a Unitarian Universalist, but she wrote Spirit of Life for a gathering of UU women in the 1970s that she was taking part in. With not having our children here, I'm going to skip the children's story. We are here, as Paul said so eloquently, because of the generosity and the commitment of those who went before us. We remain here because of the generosity and commitment of those who are here today. Let us take up the offering for the life and work and future of this community of liberal faith. Our reading this morning first appeared in the UU World magazine in 2007. It has been updated to reflect current reality. Lucille Shuck Longview went to Mexico City in 1975 as the Unitarian Universalist delegate to the United Nations International Women's Year Conference. While there, it dawned on her that one of the main obstacles to equality for women was religion itself. Even within the Unitarian Universalist Association, which affirmed equal rights for women, she believed the religious roots of sexism had never really been scrutinized. When she returned to her parish, First Parish in Lexington, Massachusetts, Longview wrote and circulated a resolution for General Assembly asking that all Unitarian Universalists examine carefully their own religious beliefs and reconsider teachings that perpetuate attitudes that cause women everywhere to be overlooked and undervalued. What became the Women and Religion Resolution passed unanimously at the Association's 1977 General Assembly. And I just have to add a footnote. If you've ever been to General Assembly, you know that nothing, a resolution that said it is raining outside would not get a unanimous vote. Somebody would go, I don't know, I don't have a window. It passed unanimously. This is like almost unheard of. Feminist groups were already active in many UU congregations and districts. The women and religion movement quickly caught on, beginning in Massachusetts and spreading to California and Maryland. In 1978, UUA President Paul Carnes appointed the Reverend Leslie Westbrook as Minister to Women and Religion and set up a committee to implement the resolution and ask districts to fund their own women and religion committees. The UUA funded the initiative through 1996. With staff, funding, and ink backing them up, women across the UUA began strategizing how to eradicate sexism from their own religion. The first task was to change sexist language. Women and religion groups charged that the UUA's principles, written in 1961, failed to affirm women. It contained phrases like the dignity of man, and failed to show respect for the earth. A long revision process led to the 1985 Principles and Purposes, which substantially rewrote the previous 6 principles and added a 7th, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Yes, that came through the efforts of women. Activists also objected to language in hymns for the celebration of life, the so-called blue hymnal, the UUA's 1964 hymnal, which had sections which were entitled Man, Love and Human Brotherhood, the Arts of Man. Interim hymn books circulated until a commission could complete the new hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, which was published in 1993, which uses more inclusive language. One of the most visible changes spawned by the women and religion movement has been the rapid increase in women UU ministers, from about 5% in 1977 to over 50% today in 2019. And that trend is expected to escalate, as 70% of UU retired ministers are men, and 75% of those preparing for ministerial fellowship are women. Along with more women in the pulpit, feminist theology has reshaped the tone of both UU worship and religious education. Many of the new worship forms and rituals designed by the women and religion groups, which include the water ceremony used in many UU congregations, the chalice lighting, which is nearly ubiquitous today, and the sharing of joys and sorrows. These have been so wholly embraced by congregations that many UUs are surprised to discover their relatively recent and feminist origins. Women demanded and got curricula celebrating goddesses, women religious leaders, and women's spirituality. Cakes for the Queen of Heaven by the Reverend Shirley Rank in 1986, revised in 2007 and today available on the web, and Rise Up and Call Her Name by Elizabeth Fisher in 1994, which is also now on the web. Yet, even with so many successes in changing their religion, some of the resolution's advocates now question whether their vision has come to pass. The idea of the resolution, says Rosemary Matson, a longtime women and religion activist, was not only to add women ministers, non-sexist language, or feminist curricula and worship forms. It was to scrutinize and root out patriarchal forms and stories and ways of being and transform our spirituality entirely. We do not want a piece of the pie, Matson has said many, many times over the years. It is still a patriarchal pie. We want to change the recipe. So ends our reading this morning. As Robin said, this sermon is the second of 2 based on excellent questions received from the congregation during the question service last month. Last week was about how did Unitarian Universalism come to not only accept but embrace atheists and agnostics. And this week, it's about pagans, or neo-pagans, or feminist spirituality, or earth-centered spirituality, which is, it's all under that umbrella. The story of how paganism came to be accepted in Unitarian Universalism is a very recent one, and it has a very short answer. Women. Okay, we're done. Let's go. The longer answer requires a story, looking at the recent history of women within our religious movement. And as I've said before, it may well be worth another service to talk about UU women in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but we're not doing that today. I officially became a feminist in the 1970s, although I had long questioned the rules for girls I learned in childhood. In college, I read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. I participated in long, late-night discussions at my all-women college about the unfair, sexist rules and expectations that enfolded us in nearly all aspects of our lives. When I got married in 1972, I kept my so-called maiden name. I participated in a consciousness-raising group in the mid-70s. I advocated for women's issues in my city and state. I served as a volunteer counselor for a rape crisis line. I lobbied the Louisiana legislature to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Spoiler, they didn't. I pushed for publications like newspapers and textbooks to use non-gendered language for human beings. But I didn't know anything about Unitarian Universalism. And then I got married another time, in 1982. My son's father and I found Unitarian Universalism pretty much by accident the following year. We decided that we needed a church to help explain life's big questions to our baby. And First UU Church in New Orleans was the second church we visited on our scientific search, and we were hooked and happy. I was delighted to learn that women were allowed to be ministers. But the blue hymnal I found in the pews was a definite problem. It had hymns like, "Turn Back, O Man," and nearly every reading referred to human beings as men and humanity as mankind. And I'm sitting there like, 10 years after I started fighting this fight, and I gotta fight it all over again in my new church? I soon learned that Unitarian Universalist women were working to make big changes in UU worship, hymnody, readings, and official documents and policy. And I also sadly learned that many UU ministers, both men and some women, were loudly proclaiming that the changes were a big mistake. Now, in the early 1980s, there was no such term as politically correct. So the argument ran that these complaining women were being irrationally oversensitive, and they were demanding changes to a tradition that was hundreds of years old and that had never bothered anybody before. Does any of this sound familiar? The UU folks opposing the changes sometimes got sarcastic and mean about the mostly women and a few men who were promoting the changes. Believe me, it was not an easy time to be a new UU feminist woman. Luckily, the minister at First Church New Orleans enthusiastically embraced the changes, and so that helped a lot. First Church put all the blue hymnals into storage and switched to the temporary green paperback hymnals, which had non-gendered language in both hymns and readings for the decade it took for the new gray hymnal to be published. 3 years into my membership in a UU church, the UUA published the first ever feminist theology curriculum, Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, which First Church purchased right away. The course was a revelation for me and for so many women and a few men. The title of the class comes from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7. God complains to the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "Don't you see what they're doing? The children are gathering wood, and the men are building fires, and the women are kneading dough, baking cakes for the Queen of Heaven. Are they just doing this to make me mad?" Okay, that's paraphrased just a little bit, but God does use the phrase cakes for the Queen of Heaven. People, human beings, men included, had worshipped goddesses for millennia. Whoa! It was a revelation. There were religions and cultures that honored women and women-centered experiences like menstruation and birth and menopause. It was mind-blowing. It expanded our spirits. As happened in a lot of UU congregations, after Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, a neo-pagan group started at First Church to honor the cycles of life, the cycle of the seasons, and the feminine divine. While this development had the complete support of the then minister at First Church New Orleans, it was not universally welcomed across the UUA. Humanist ministers and lay leaders, both men and women, decried the pagan groups as a giant step backwards for Unitarian Universalism. Some UUs argued that their congregations would lose face in their surrounding community if a pagan group started at their church, or that their church's reputation would suffer if it became known that the UUA allowed pagans. Some UUs argued that nature was red in tooth and claw, a quote from a poem by Tennyson, and that our liberal faith should not honor violence. Other UUs argued that feminine language for the divine didn't even matter because no UUs believed in God anyway. Well, they were wrong on both counts. As energy and enthusiasm grew around the feminine divine, generated by both the women's movement and in the form of the Women in Religion Committee and the Cakes curriculum, valid criticism arose as well. The Cakes curriculum focused almost exclusively on so-called Western civilization. Sessions barely nodded toward religions and cultures of Asia, Africa, India, and the Pacific Islands. A new course was commissioned to rectify these omissions, and Rise Up and Call Her Name was published in 1994. I contributed a section in that curriculum on New Orleans voodoo. All these changes in language and worship and the UUA bylaws inspired even more to come. A group of Unitarian Universalist pagans who only a few years before had founded the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, or CUPS, started a petition to add earth-centered spirituality to the source of our living tradition. After much debate, discussion, and even occasionally rancorous argument, the principles and purposes of the UUA were amended by vote at the General Assembly of 1995, adding earth-based spirituality as a source of our living tradition. Depending on how the question is phrased, when UUs are surveyed about their spiritual beliefs, somewhere between 8% and a third of Unitarian Universalists identify as either pagan, neo-pagan, earth-centered, or having feminist spirituality. Different people using different terms to describe the spiritualities under this broad umbrella. Many Unitarian Universalists have incorporated elements of pagan or earth-centered spirituality into their personal practice, even if it's or a stroll along a beach. Many UU congregations, whether or not they host an official UU pagan group, have held pagan or pagan-inspired worship services, as we have. Lots of UUs, both lay and ordained, have added a pagan hyphen to their list of spiritualities, as I have. The blessed be that I say at the end of every sermon is a nod to my pagan spirituality, which is strongly identified with New Orleans voodoo. And of course, many UUs who would never identify as pagan have very strong beliefs that honor the earth and the cycles of the seasons, and quite a few Unitarian Universalists consider animals as their spirit guides. Yes, I'm looking at you, Robin. Now, while it is clearly a phenomenon of the late 20th century and the women's movement, we can see from last week's sermon how deeply connected this change is to our transcendentalist ancestors. Finding inspiration in nature, honoring all genders, discovering truths in formerly despised religions, all of these are directly influenced by the work and writings and lives of Emerson, Parker, Fuller, and so many others on whose shoulders we rest. I cannot end this sermon without lifting up Rosemary Matson's lament from the end of our reading. Many, many changes have occurred in Unitarian Universalism since the first Women and Religion Committee was founded, but the work is not done. While women make up more than half of UU ministers working today, and more than 75% of UU ministers incoming, they still suffer a great disparity in both salary and the size of congregations served. A large number of women ministers serve as assistant or associate ministers, community ministers, or ministers of religious education, all of which pay lower than parish ministers. Women ministers are also more than twice as likely as their male counterparts to undergo a negotiated termination, which is the really polite UU way to say fired. And while we do remember the conflict over the UUA staff position just a few years back as a white supremacy problem, it was also a sexism problem, as the qualified applicant who was passed over was not just Latinx, but was a woman. Patriarchy is still alive and well in the UUA. It is a hard nut to crack. We still need to change the pie recipe. The old hymn by Unitarian James Russell Lowell proclaims, "New occasions teach new duties." May we always strive to be the kind of religious people who are open to the new revelations and new duties brought about by new occasions. So might this be. Amen, Ashe, Shalom, Salam, Namaste, blessed be. Please turn in your great hymnals to number 44, We Sing of Golden Mornings, and please stand as your bodies and spirits allow. Lifetimes, for they shall walk in faith, that their work will not be in vain. Blessed are we when we know we only appear so small, because what we are creating is so big. Blessed are we who are part of one another. Blessed are we when we give new life and light to others, for we will live more richly ourselves. Blessed, blessed be. Let us join hands as we are willing and able for our closing circle.
Are we going to extinguish the phone?
Let's extinguish the chalice. I'm sorry. Let's all extinguish the chalice. You know the words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire